Welcome. In this hands-on, we're going to be learning how to launch WordPress on a local Kubernetes cluster. In order for you to do this, you'll first need to make sure that the version of Docker you have installed supports the integrated Kubernetes. And you will see this by checking out the preferences right there. I'm on a Mac. It'll be a little different if you're on Windows or Linux, but it'll be similar. And you can just simply enable Kubernetes. Now, in order for you to see this menu in the first place, you will need to make sure you're using the Edge version, which I believe is somewhere right there, experimental features. So you'll have to download the actual Edge version of Docker, install it, like I had said in early hands-on during the class. Once you have this enabled, press enable. It'll take several minutes to actually enable and download all of Kubernetes directly on your system. Once you have this, then you're good to go. You can actually get started. So the first thing you get once Kubernetes is installed is that you can actually run kubectl, which is a command for Kubernetes, which is basically the command line interface that allows you to interact with the Kubernetes API, right? What basically takes all of the commands of creating pods and services and everything, right? And there's quite a lot of things you can do right there, but we're going to be just following this tutorial on the left, which by the way is on the official Kubernetes website, so you can easily just follow this back afterward if you want to run the same exact thing on your computer. So the first thing that we learn about that Kubernetes here does have something that is kind of unique to this system, and you can actually store particular secrets within the cluster, right? Because this is one of the main issues in Docker. If we look at Docker Compose and other things, those passwords, those environmental variables are kind of in clear text in those configuration files, which is definitely not best practice. So Kubernetes really introduced this command right here. It allows you to create a secret. You can actually name it, and you can just type your password. So we're going to keep it as its default. It really doesn't matter here. And then once we do this, realize that a password was actually created. Now, if I run the command kubectl get secrets, as suggested by the tutorial on the right, I'll be able to actually see any secret that actually I might have stored. And there's one default that you see here actually from Kubernetes itself. But the one that we're interested in here is actually the one we just added, which is mysql-pass. And it tells you it's an opaque, so we don't know what's in there, but it has one piece of data, which is the password that we actually entered. So great. Now, how we're going to go about deploying MySQL itself, because we know that WordPress depends on the database, and we've seen before. Same thing here. We have to basically go through and deploy a database first on a cluster, so we can then connect the WordPress application to the database afterwards. So let's go through quickly the file here. If you remember, this is a declarative file, so we're going to just see exactly how this works. The first part to tell us there is a service, right? This is the highest level thing. We want to have a MySQL, so a MySQL server service that is exposed on port 3306, which is the default port for that particular database for MySQL. And we just name it here. We say no IP. We just put a label so we know it's actually WordPress, and we actually name it WordPress MySQL. So here, pretty much standard here, nothing complicated. Now in the second part, we talk about persistent volume claim. And so that's something new if you're new to Kubernetes, to understand how basically they manage the volumes. Remember in Docker Compose or Docker, you can actually specify volumes, right, when you declare them in the Docker Compose file, so you can map them and map a particular path under the container into an actual physical volume. Well, Kubernetes kind of formalizes this a little bit better by what they call persistent volume claims. So here we basically say, hey, we really need to have some storage that's going to be persistent, between the containers over the container life cycle, whether they stop or restart. Because if you remember, containers from early on in the class, they really are read-only file system up until the point where you start to fire them and they run, but anything after when they stop is discarded. When you relaunch the image, you still start back from scratch at the same exact point. So in order for you to save data when the container is actually running, you actually need a persistent volume. And this is what this does right here. It tells you, okay, this is a persistent volume claim. The name is this one. Okay, we just, again, this is for our application in WordPress. So we put it in the same group with this label. We say we need, read write once. There's just several access mode, but this is, again, just common here. We don't need any particular read write behavior for this one. And the storage, we say 20 gig. So that basically just says I need 20 gig of storage somewhere for this MySQL system. And then finally here, we actually talk about the kind of deployment. And so we actually start to describe again, we give it a name, we give it the group for our labels. We actually start to talk about the strategy, what happens if we need to recreate it, right? We actually start about the different templates. So here we talk about the image MySQL 5.0. That's the version we need. We just give it a name. We say this is the root password right there, has to come from our secret key, which we declared as MySQL-pass. So we just say it's a password. So you see, we basically declare, and that's really one of the things I want to get people to understand through this hands-on, that we're really just declaring what we want. There's nothing that's compared to the earlier techniques I showed in virtualization or with Docker or Docker files, where we basically declare a sequence of actions, of scripts. Here we're not doing any of that. We're really just declaring what we expect it to be. It's just a simple configuration file that describes the behavior of our service that we're trying to launch. And so this is a big difference here, and this is really what's the power, I think, of Kubernetes, and why it is so appealing is because you kind of get away from this sequence of action to launch something. The system, once it knows the way you're describing what you want, it will take care of making sure that all those things actually happen. So here we continue down the file. We want the container port 3306 because that's the port that we need for the MySQL to be able to communicate with WordPress. We actually declare the volume mount. We say with that particular persistent storage we declared above right here, right? We want to map it under that path under that containers because that's where the MySQL system stores its databases under /var/lib/MySQL. And finally, we just actually talk about the volume right here again. We just say this is the one we actually want to claim, right? Not only we want to mount it, but we want to say that volume here comes from this particular claim that we actually declared just right here.